Hey, it's Veit Schenk with another very exciting interview. Today I have with me Peter Block, who's the author of Flawless Consulting, which incidentally, who is responsible for a bold patch on my head, because being true to his word, he's walking the talk, and in his book, it's less about prescribing and it's more about asking questions. So Flawless Consulting is all about asking deep and meaningful and thought-provoking questions. And whenever I have a question, I have to scratch my head, and hence the bald patch. So, welcome on the call, Peter.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Alrighty. So, today I'd like to talk to you about a few questions on how to use that whole philosophy, the flawless consulting, for prospecting, selling your services, delivering your service. But before we do that, how will we start putting this all into context? Can you give us in a 1 or maybe 3-sentence summary of what the essence of flawless consulting is and why it's so important to take this approach as opposed to others?
I think this book grew out of failure.
Okay.
It grew out of the experience of being right and nobody cared. Most consultants, and it started with our IT group years ago, who felt they were making recommendations and people were not implementing them. It was very frustrating. And so they said, is there something going on here that we're not seeing? And so what they weren't seeing was the relationship was the point. They thought content was the point. They thought expertise was the point. They'd grown up, as we all did, that being right isn't enough, and it's not. So what I tried to do, and it's not so much this is better than others, it's trying to clarify what kind of works for all of us, which is to try to give form and detail to the relationship dimension of trying to have influence over people over which you have zero control.
Okay.
So it's really, the relationship is the point, and that's hard for content people to accept, like, realize, honor. So that's the intent. Okay,
perfect. Now, let's look at the first question, and this is immediately related to what you said here. It's around prospecting. At the moment, if you look at the marketplace, a lot of people pitch the idea or try to sell you on the idea that you have to establish your expert status or maven status. You just keep hearing that everywhere. You have to position yourself as the expert so people trust you and buy from you or buy your services. And of course, there are tons of problems associated with this, and one of them is, of course, that feeling of I'm up here and you're down there. So my question to you, Peter, then is, what's your take on this whole you must position yourself as an expert issue? What do you see as the main challenges, and what, in your experience, is the right way to do this in practice?
It's very hard to differentiate yourself based on I know and you don't. I don't think people hire experts. I think they hire people they want to work with.
Okay.
I think they hire people who understand them quickly. They hire people who listen well. And so the whole notion that somehow I need an elevator speech, I need a brochure, I need to demonstrate past accomplishments isn't what people hire. It's what salespeople tell you you have to do. But if you look closely at any good selling effort, it's really a good consulting effort. It's a good listening effort. It says that the anxiety on the part of every client is, will they get me and the uniqueness of my situation? Now, the reality is most clients are not that unique.
Yes, my business is unique. My challenge is unique. You've never seen this before.
So is my mother and my cousin and my second wife. But when you get beneath the surface, it's not unique, but they're human beings that are unique in the way they're expressing what they're up against. So to show up and say, I knew before I met you, is a lousy way to differentiate yourself. And that's the challenge. So you say, well, how do I distinguish or differentiate myself? Well, it's the way I show up. It's the way I listen, the way I pay attention, the way I kind of connect with people, even if it's somebody you'll never meet.
Okay. So you kind of mentioned the business cards and the brochures and all that kind of stuff, which I guess is, if we now look back at prospecting, the first step. I mean, it's all very well being able to say, look, we have this listening part, but you need to get there first. And so my next question is kind of around the the trust factor. People will do business with people they trust, and you've kind of mentioned that. But of course, there's another form of trust, and let's call it expectation. They trust that you can fix things for them, and one of the ways this is expressed is, you've got a shiny brochure, or you've got, whatever, you've got all these recommendations, or you've got this wonderful business card, or something like that. So 2 questions around there is how do you get over that first hurdle to manage that expectation with shiny or not shiny objects? And then the second one would be, because people start to look for that ready-made answer, they have that expectation you can fix it for them, which I guess is probably the exact opposite of what flawless consulting is about, right?
Well, everybody wants a turnkey solution. Yep. Everybody wants to have a strong online presence and not spend 1 minute in creating it. They want to outsource their business, in a sense, outsource their sales. So, of course, that's what they want, and nothing of value can be created that way, especially if you're, So I think that the question is, how do you generate leads? How do you get to the first conversation?
Exactly.
And I think you have to get out there. A friend of mine used to do a lot of community organizing, and he said whenever 3 or people more were gathered, I start talking. And and I think the question is, how do I let people know I'm here and help them sample me? So any place you give a talk, anything you offer service, any places that are draw people should draw you. Anything you can write, and so you need some way to let people sample, because everybody knows that a fancy business card or a fancy brochure can be, anybody can produce that. So it's lead generation, and it's tough. A lot of your leads will come from your phone book, the people that you meet, people that you met. And anytime you meet anybody, then you can use the card as a reminder. The brochure is not useful to sell. It's useful for your clients to convince other people in their company that you're a good person to hire. So in a sense, whoever you connect, it's often not the primary customer. There's other customers involved. So you say, well, whoever I made contact with is my sales force. So the lead behinds are useful, but it's the connection that counts. And it's tough. The lead generation is what you spend your life trying to produce. And if you're like me at the other end of the career, you say, oh, where were you when I needed you?
It's interesting. You're saying, the business card, the brochure is more like a reminder in that whole process.
Yeah.
Okay. Yesterday, I was talking to David Meerman Scott, the author of the PR rules, or the new rules of marketing and PR, and he's saying that content you put out there first to create the trust and to create that first contact, if you like, that is something that should never be hidden behind a barrier, like a sign-up form on a website, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people actually hide that content and say, hey, in exchange for my great content, I want your email address. And then only later on, once people are leads, then you can start emailing them, etc. So it's quite interesting how you put your piece there in the middle of that process.
I totally agree with what he's saying. I think you give away everything you have every minute you can.
Which, incidentally, you do in your book. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic.
Well, because basically you're looking for a long-term connection. And if people get value from you right away, the ones that are going to exploit you, you say, well, they're going to use it and never pay me. Don't worry about it, because they won't know how to use it. Unless you're really selling a commodity, unless you're an electrical company, they can't use your information without you, because you need to interpret it. They need to customize it. They need to make sense of it. They need to understand it more deeply. So I figure every sales call, I always view it as a consulting opportunity, and I'm going to be as useful to that person as possible. Every website I've got, give away as much as possible. Now, of course, I want to know who they are, and you can beg for that, but you can't require it.
Okay. Oh God, there's already 5 questions that have popped up in my head.
I also could be wrong in all this, so.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
We could all be wrong. How about we have a look at, well, actually, the one question that sort of first popped up was a lot of people have that fear that they give away too much information, that people then could go into implementing that stuff themselves. And you've kind of said, most people lack the perspective,
Yes.
if you like, to actually apply it themselves. So how would we cover the 3 main forms of consultancy or consultative selling, which you cover in your book, the expert, the pair of hands, and the true consultant?
Well,
Can you quickly sort of tell us what the difference is between those?
Pair of hands means they call you a vendor. And they decide what's needed, when it's needed, how it's needed, and it's work for hire. And maybe part of your practice is that. They need something to work out. They want to add some bells and whistles to their site, and you can do it with very little conversation. It's a technical. So pair of hands. The expert is when they want an answer, and they are very dependent on you. They come and they say, we don't know anything about this. We're just getting started. We're a small business. We want to create an online presence. We'll turn it over to you. You come back to us when you have a fix. And the collaborative says that this is a partnership, that we will co-create a future for this business, because what seemed like a technical question in the beginning to the client is always more complicated than that. Because every time you create a new way of connecting with customers or potential customers, you're deciding again who you are. You're deciding again what are the 1 or 2 things that you're going to bet on. Because most people want to be all things to all people. And that never works. There's no power in that. And so every situation, regardless of what they come to you for, I have a choice how to respond. And I'm going to respond by saying, well, I need to talk to you before we can do anything useful. I need to understand what matters to you. I need to understand where your business is headed. What are the 1 or 2 things you want to bet on to differentiate you and your marketplace? What's the personality that you are that will come through in the website and the online presence that we're creating? How do we personalize it? So these are all partnership questions. And I don't care what they want from me. I mean, I want to ask them, what do you want from me? What do you want from this project? But I also want to remember to say, here's what I want from you. Here's what's required of you to make this more successful than you imagined. Because most people's expectations in some ways are too small. Now, with the online, of course, everybody expects magic. They all want 1 million hits a day and go viral. And it's not going to happen. And most of the stuff that goes viral, you don't want to be a part of anyhow. And so that's the 50-50, the exchange of wants. You say, what do you want from me? Here's what I want from you. What do you want from this project? Here's what I require from you to make this work. This is the groundwork of partnership. Some questions that you ask. You ask them, how do you feel about how it's going so far? So halfway through every sales call, you stop and say, how's this going? And they say, what are you talking about? And you say, I want to know, are you getting what you want out of this conversation? Now, most of the time we ask at the end of the conversation. When it's over, we say, well, that was good. Thank you. Anything we can do better next time? Well, it's too late. I don't want feedback when my life is over. I want, so in the middle. So these are little structures you can use that embody the 50-50 collaborative. Now, sometimes it's not possible. They want a vendor. You want the business. You do what they say. And sometimes they want to turn it over to you and you want the business, and so you let them turn it over to you. But in terms of showing up with an intention, you can always intend to show up as a partner.
Okay, perfect. Now, I've seen this in practice quite a bit when you have a fairly dominant business owner who comes in and basically wants stuff fixed. I mean, that's how they run their businesses. You go fix that, you fix that, and you fix that. And I've seen it when you come in and you start asking these questions, and the first thing they go, you're wasting my time. You just, go and do this. So what's your advice there? Is that a customer where you go, look, I don't really want this because I'm here as a partner as opposed to someone, First I'd say, I'm sorry I didn't come here to waste your time. That was not my goal.
But the second is to say, well, let me tell you why I'm asking these questions. I'm asking these questions so what you end up with in your hand is going to work. What you're asking from me, I can deliver, but it's not going to give you the results you want. And I want a long-term relationship with you. And most high control people require dependent salespeople to function. And my experience is when it's a high control person, if I say, stop a second, what you're asking for is not going to get you the results you want. And just look right in the eyes if we're equals. And half the time they'll be relieved because at some level they know that they're controlling everything is what's killing them and hurting the business, but they don't know how to get out of it. And so I'm going to act as if an alternative way of being with this person is possible, and sometimes I'm wrong. And it scares me to do business that's not going to be successful. The reason I would ever say no or be cautious or saying I'm not sure this is going to work isn't because I don't do windows. I do everything. It's that if I work with this business and it doesn't give them the results they're looking for, they're going to tell 5 people, and that's going to kill me. So I'd rather be seen as stubborn than incompetent.
So that is a perfect point. Really love that. To maybe take that one level further, as a consultant, your main interest is, of course, to help the client, and sometimes it means telling them what they don't want to hear. And I think you've expressed it I can't remember where I read it or heard it. You said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, what I'm hearing is their best version, but it's not going to get us anywhere.
Right.
In other words, what they think the problem is isn't really the problem at all. Do you have some more examples of, let's forget about the high control person, but, any examples where people think it's one thing, but it's really something else?
Well, it's almost always the case. Because unless it's a highly technical question, they're trying to grow their business. And their sense of how to grow the business may be what they need help on. And you may look and say, look, you can do all the online things you want. But if you don't work on your way of responding to customers, if you don't change the interface. So I always take what they first ask for is the presenting problem, which means it's their best estimate, but then you have your own judgment as to what the problem is or how to reframe it. So that reframing is the most helpful thing you can do. Because especially with the online world, they do want a turnkey operation. They think it's simple, and you know how complicated it is. They think these are little switches that you have a little black box you can switch on and off, and you can't. So you're always dealing with expectations of magic. And you have to get comfortable saying what you want is magic. And I only do that on evenings and weekends. I can't do that during the day. But I don't blame anybody because they're giving you their best estimate of what they want. But then you say, I need to get familiar enough with you and your whole business and how you position yourself and what's the value proposition before I can put technology to work for you. And they don't get that. And so I always think the way they first describe the situation is a presenting problem. And my reason for being there is to help them reframe it in a more powerful way. And in that sense, I'm always on their side. And I'll do anything I can to help, what they create, make it work. And I don't, some sense if they're irritated with that or uncomfortable or patient with that, I just reassure them. I say, I know you're irritated, uncomfortable, and impatient, but you're not going to get what you want if we follow what you came in here with, period.
That is absolutely perfect, because especially with modern technology where they don't really understand how it works, and you said it's magic or it's a black box, they think they're buying a service where they say, look, do me my website, do me my social media presence, do et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, unless you know exactly what they're trying to achieve, it's not going to get them anywhere, and actually it's going to end in disappointment. So perfect, really good point there.
Maybe just tell them you have to learn how to relate to this media. Let's just pick one thing for 6 months and have you learn, because if you can connect, it's a whole different way of thinking. It's a different way of being. And so you're always trying to simplify it for them, where some consultants keep making it more complicated, and that's what drives you crazy.
All right. So if we take the dominant person again, or the high control person, there's nothing you've said that is real dialogue begins when you've got resistance. Can you give us some insights on how this actually helps you build a true partnership with the client, as opposed to just suddenly you've got an objection to overcome type thing?
Yeah. Well, the sales language is how do you overcome objections. Well, if I'm a client or a customer or a business, I don't want to be overcome. Maybe by God, but not by a sales. And so basically when people give you a hard time, it's because they're anxious and they're worried, and you have to engage the deeper concern and don't get distracted by them changing the subject and talking too fast. They're looking at their watch, they're multitasking, they're avoiding eye contact, they're getting irritable, they're irritating, they're controlling, they're passive. All the little things that show up in dialogue, in relationship. I keep asking the question, what are you really worried about? And I don't want to be seduced by their behavior or distracted. So that's called that in therapy. It's called resistance. And when you go to a helper, a therapist, the healing, getting better doesn't occur until the resistance shows up. So when people give me a hard time, I think finally they're taking me seriously. I just don't want to respond in kind to the hard time. And so if I explain something twice and they don't get it, explaining it 2 more times isn't going to help. Instead, I can say, you really don't understand what I'm talking about, do you? And they say, no. I said, what's so confusing to you? So you're always trying to work through the domain of their understanding and not get trapped in talking faster. Now, some people think if you don't like the station, the solution is to turn up the volume.
Like we all do when we speak to foreigners and they don't understand this.
It's the old joke, honey, he's Japanese, he's not deaf.
Or for that, matter, it's with kids.
Kids the same way. They totally get it. What just makes us mad about kids is they rule. All right?
Yes.
They ultimately have control over their behavior in our relationship. That's why we parents have support groups to share their helplessness.
I've got 4 of them.
Yeah, good. Congratulations.
Alrighty. When we look at this partnership thing, so now we've ironed out the partnership, we're all working together, things may just not work out. A project may fail. All right? And if we look at the previous scenario where, for example, part of your magic you're doing is you're delivering a solution. It could be, a service like search engine optimization. Let's take that as a thing. You've done your consulting, you now do search engine optimization, but something happened. Google changes the algorithm suddenly. All your work you've done is no longer there. It's undone by Google being just plain evil. So, and the obvious response then is, you promised to do SEO, and it's almost like the onus is on the service you're providing as opposed to the consulting you did, and therefore that service you're providing clearly sucks, and now I'm going to go and tell 5 other people.
Yeah.
So 2 questions around that. What's a good way to educate prospects or clients about failure, or the fact that you consider failure to be okay? How do you sell that?
Well, from the beginning, you have to teach them your business. And so in the beginning you say, look, we're going to do all of this, and it's a 7 in 10 chance it's going to work, and 30% of the time the world changes. But part of what you're doing is teaching them your business, so even if Google changes the algorithm, all that work, the work you really did was help them understand the Google world. And unpredictability is part of that world. And they say, no, I want a predictable outcome. And I say, I want a predictable outcome too. And, but it doesn't exist in the world that you're participating in. And it doesn't exist in the physical store they have. If they don't keep readapting their store or moving it or making it bigger or smaller or re-merchandising it, it's not going to work. So the fact that something doesn't work doesn't mean we've failed. It just means the world is more complicated. The other thing is never defend yourself. You have nothing to defend ever. And if they say, I'm disappointed, it didn't work, we were on it and then it's gone now, it's a failure, All you do is say, I'm sorry. I see what you're talking about. What you thought you were getting, we didn't get here. And so that becomes to be able to confess to, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, sorry, I heard a funny little noise. So I know how to get out of trouble. I confess. And I'll never defend myself. Now, at night, if you want to defend yourself and have a conversation with God about how unfair the day was, that's fine. But during the day, you just take, if they're feeling it's not working, say, I got it. For you, this isn't working. I'm concerned. Let's talk about that. So failure is the beginning of a conversation. And some of that is just the world is that way. So I never want to argue with my client, and I never want to defend myself. And not because I don't feel like it, it's just it doesn't work. And if something blows up, say it blows up, it blew up. And if they say why it blew up, you say at this moment, I haven't a clue. And if they say, what kind of consultant are you? You say, I got the same question right now. That's how you sustain a relationship. And you're not the consultant that I had in mind, and I say, I know, I'm not the consultant I had in mind either. So that exaggerates it a little bit, but that's how you maintain ground. That's how you stay connected to people, is by not selling, not defending, not arguing, seeing the world through their eyes. It doesn't mean you've given up your position. It's just sometimes things don't work, and that's the way it is.
Okay. Let's take that one step further. Say you are now going in to not only talk to the business owner, but actually, go in and do some teaching, for example, their staff. You want to do some sales training for them so they can, continue the conversation you started on the website. And there's that whole issue of blueprints. Everyone loves blueprints. Yeah. And I guess they're kind of popular because, if it's a proven blueprint, it must be safe. And, 100,000 years ago, if you follow that plan, then that's proven not to get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, then you'll be safe. So, and we all know, if blueprints really did work that well in practice, the two of us now wouldn't be talking right now.
Correct.
So what's your take on the whole blueprint issue? Because people are demanding it. Hey, show us what you're going to teach our people, and how do you talk potential clients out of it?
Well, on one hand, you need to reassure them. So you can give them kind of a structure, even though you know it won't be helpful, because sometimes they just need to know where we're headed. Whether we go that way or not doesn't matter. So in certain cultures especially, people, it's not they want to control things, they just want more predictability in their life. So I have to honor that wish as long as I don't take it seriously. The other is that, so you can kind of create artifacts of a blueprint, a piece of paper, 5 pieces of paper, little boxes. When I wrote the consulting book, I wrote it for engineers and IT people who like a literal world. So I put boxes with lines between them. I made lots of lists. Now, what's in those lists is ambiguous as can be. But so in some sense, you want to honor their need for a blueprint, but don't ever believe it. And what you're speaking to is their anxiety about the future. Sales training has more to do with confidence than it does with content. And so part of the way you train people in sales is to do it highly experientially. You get them connected to each other. You let them practice a lot. You don't talk to them that much. Nobody learns from watching other people sell. Nobody ever learned math by watching a math teacher solve problems on a blackboard. And in most classes, that's what we do. So I think the way you structure the sales training to give them as much role play practice with each other, you're dealing with the question of confidence. And that's the way to do it. I think the more you talk, the less people learn. So you might call it sales learning instead of sales training, because they're not dogs.
Let's do some sales learning. That's perfect. I like it.
Okay. And it's the way of thinking about it. What you say, everybody has their own style. But the way of thinking about it is say, what's the fastest way for them to learn and gain confidence over this new material? And I know practice in a safe environment is the way to do it, whether it's a safe environment of an online, kind of a webinar where they can, because the technology now, even if you're not in the room with them, it's just the same as almost being, it's not the same as being in the room, but you can break them into small groups and monitor those small groups just like you could if you're in the room.
Yep. Now, by the way, that chapter in your book on learning over teaching, that kind of thing, I think is absolutely fabulous, and really, I personally think it should be at the beginning of your book. But then again, I'm looking at the second edition. I've got the really old book, so I don't know if you moved it around in the third edition, but it's absolutely fantastic.
You should have told me that before I did the third edition. If I live long enough for the fourth edition, I'll start with that. Thank you.
Excellent. So maybe as a wrap up, to look at that philosophy of learning, good old classroom style teaching doesn't really work. Now, one of the issues I'm facing, for example, all the time is fix them down there type situation. You get called in by management and say, look, down there they don't get their numbers, they don't hit their numbers, they need some sales training. Or then you go in there and they go, well, them up there, they're not providing us with what we need, or they're imposing stupid rules. And in a way, I think of it like a classical sort of corporate situation. No one tries to or wants to step across that or step forward. Everyone has their toes at one line, and no one really wants to step forward, because if you don't stand out in a corporate setting, no one's going to hit you over the head. So you might as well keep going with what everyone else is doing, and there you go.
Well, that's the mythology. The person who stands up gets shot. I think it's wrong. I think in the business world now, where labor cost is the enemy, they're going to keep people that stand up. They're going to keep people that take a chance. And you're right, every client I ever had thought somebody else was the problem. Someday if somebody says, I want your help because I'm the cause of the problem, I'm probably going to have a heart attack. And so what you say to yourself is, I'm there to help them take responsibility for their own contribution to what's going on here. So I don't care who I'm with, I'm always trying to refocus the conversation back towards, well, what is your role in this? Every executive says, I want you to fix those people. And I say, thank you, I understand you want me to fix those people. Period. Eye contact, a moment of silence, and say, what part are you playing in what you're so frustrated with those people? And he says, what are you talking about? I told you to fix those first line people. I said, I know you did. But you must be a player in this. There's some part you think you have. And if they say, I don't think I'm playing any role, I say, well, maybe that's something worth learning about. Maybe part of what would really make a difference here is if every person here who thinks someone else is the problem begins to look at their own contribution, which is to really tell them what you need to create here is more a culture of accountability. Now, you do this in a nice way, eye contact, but I think that's what teaches people. That's a learning experience. So I view every conversation as a learning experience, and the big thing you're helping them learn is that if they can take accountability for what's going on with this business, that's how they create an alternative future, because that's what they come to you for. They want the future to be different than the past. And I can tell people, if you want a future distinct from the past, if you want something to really turn around here, then each party to this business has to be treated as a player. There's no audience. Top management is not an audience watching the first level people do their work. And at the first level, it's the same thing. They say, well, if my boss this, my boss's boss, the owner did this. That conversation has no power in it, because it's a conversation of helplessness. So once you start listening for that, then you realize, well, part of the reason I'm here is to help them engage in a different conversation, a conversation of, well, here's my part in what's going on here. And you say, tell me more about that. That's interesting. So that becomes, every moment is a learning opportunity, and it's always trying to renegotiate, restructure, reframe whose business is this. That everybody you're talking with, I'm talking to as if they're owners. And I don't want to collude with the employees either. When they whine about their bosses,
That would have been my next question.
Yeah.
You go in there and there's a group of 12 who all go, we have to be here.
My mommy. I always tell them I want my mommy too, but She's long gone. And basically, I asked the question after they complain about their bosses. I say, what are you doing to construct a boss like that? So,
what do you mean?
Exactly. I think children raise parents. I think audiences create performers. I think listeners create speaking. And so I say to them, you must be playing some role in creating a boss like that. And part of the role, the way you create it, is you don't support each other. That if you all came together on these issues and spoke as one, no boss can fire you all. And so that's the thinking. Now, you'll have your own language, but the thinking behind the language is to say employees are creating bosses as powerfully as bosses are creating and controlling employees. And in some sense, the inmates run the prison. And if you start thinking that way, then you'll find opportunities to give voice to that. And that's what empowerment is about. So part of our job as consultants is to give power and more choice to everybody, whoever it is we're talking to in a system, and just not collude with the notion that if the boss was different, my life would be different. Because then they're waiting for an event that will never take place.
Peter, that was absolutely wonderful. I mean, I'm truly blown away. So normally I end with, where can we find out more about you? But this time, I really mean it. If someone wants to find out more about this, obviously, there is Flawless Consulting, which they can get on Amazon, I guess. But do you also do trainings around this topic?
We do. We do them all over the world. So
okay.
Design, DESIGNED, learning is the business. Designlearning.com. And if you go there, we do webinars, we do online stuff, we do public workshops, we do a few of those, and we do in-house workshops, lots of places. And we'd love to just be connected, and Bill and other people who kind of are available for that love to talk. And again, to be as helpful as we can, regardless of what your situation. So thank you for asking, and thanks for having me on here.
No, it was absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay. And by the way, can you send a big thanks to Maggie for setting this all up?
I work for Maggie, and I'll be happy to thank her.
You work for her. Excellent. All righty. Thank you, Peter.
Okay. Have a good day.
All right. Bye then.
Bye.